Hello. I guess it works. You can hear me, even if I talk really quietly, like that. Does that work? All right. Hello, everybody. Wow, that's even too loud for me. Good late morning, good lunchtime. Everybody, my name is David LeBlanc. I am chair of the Department of Politics in the college, and I'm also the director of the Global Policy Center here at the Batten School. We are delighted to sponsor this week's or today's International Week speaker. Aaron Chaffetz is a graduate of the Batten School. He received his MPP in 2013. He was president of the Batten Council, and as Aaron is too modest to admit, he was awarded, I think, the first pilot award for leadership here at the Batten School. Aaron's success both in the college and at the Batten School prepared him for, and we had many conversations about this, it prepared him for a large number of different careers after leaving Batten, and he really didn't know what to do. And I think that's a wonderful position for students to be in, and one of the reasons we invited Aaron back is so that he can share with you how he got to where he is. He is currently at the United States Institute, USAID, United States Agency for International Development, thank you. And he's working on some projects relevant to global disease, HIV. He's worked on tuberculosis. He's spent some time in the field. And I could tell you more about that, but I think you'd rather hear directly from Aaron. So let me introduce Aaron Chaffetz, and he will talk for a little bit, and then there will be plenty of time for Q&A.
Professor LeBlanc and I were just talking about the fact that I started as a research assistant for him 2010, 2009. So it was, I've known Professor LeBlanc for quite a while now. It was nice to be able to come back down and work with him to be able to do this talk. So thank you for the introduction. It's always great to be back at UVA and especially in Garrett Hall. My class had the fortune of being the first one to be back in this space since it was renovated. And you know, it's changed a lot since then. It's only been a few years. But it was really great to be able to escape the masses after spending way too many hours in Clemens and Alderman. And, you know, I spent a lot of time here listening to presentations and spending a little bit of time in the back doing some studying. But the last time I was here, kind of up here, was in my official capacity as president. I was introducing Eric Cantor, who spoke a few years ago. And so while neither of us are still working on the Hill, I spent one measly summer up there, but I got a little bit of experience. You know, hopefully I'm up here being able to give you guys some insight as to how Batten has influenced my career so far, while limited outside of since graduation. So today I just kind of want to talk a little bit about data and how that's relevant in my life today, as well as how Batten has influenced where I've gotten so far. So, you know, we're in the 21st century where data is all around us, and, you know, we're exposed to it every single day from, you know, the moment we get up and we check the weather forecast to, you know, reading an article that has a graph or a chart in it. And so this data is being collected by the government, by firms, large and small, really to make these informed decisions or expose underlying truths about the world we're living in. I hope some of you recall there was a story a few years ago about this use of data when it came to Target. And this was prior to the massive data breach that came out last year. But this is a New York Times article talking about how Target was using customer history to target them. And the story was about how this father had found all these coupons from Target that were delivered to his daughter about prenatal care and all these things for pregnancy. And the father called up Target, flipping out that they were pushing, you know, his daughter to become pregnant. And it turned out, based on her history of purchases, they had realized she was pregnant before her father knew. So, you know, Target's not the only one using this data that it's collecting, to their advantage to target us as consumers and as a population. And these efforts, seem devious while they're out there, but we shake our heads when we think about it, and we laugh about it, and we move on. We don't think too much about it, and I think a large part of that is just the ubiquity of of it going on today. We have grocery stores that are collecting this data on us and selling it to us as these rewards programs that we're signing up for and saving this money when they're using it to really collect and target us for purchases. And it's not just limited to companies, but President Obama in his re-election campaign in 2012 was really a front runner using all of this big data through micro-targeting in order to really figure out what was motivating voters on a very granular level, and then target them to come out and vote and donate. And so that was kind of a big worry for a lot of people. But I think this thing is happening more and more, and we tend to be okay with it. And I was at a Michael Pollan talk. I don't know, how many people know who Michael Pollan is? Okay, so he writes about food, and he works for the New York Times, and he's at Berkeley. So this was, he was talking about one of his books, The Omnivore's Dilemma, but a question came up, and he was talking about, he made a point that, we end up being okay letting companies basically tell us how we should eat. And they're able to engineer the advertising that we sit down and we watch, or walking through the grocery stores, they're selling the prime real estate where you're walking down and the very sugary cereals are at that prime real estate level for the kids in the shopping cart, or you're likely to see certain tomato sauces that are in those prime real estates. So, we accept this and just take it as a given, but as soon as the government and policy becomes involved, so government telling us, foods we should eat, and the food pyramid and things, we tend to put up our hands and say the government is overstepping its bounds based on these policies and the data it's collecting. But I think I'd argue that data can be used for good, and there's a lot out there, a lot of people that are using this data for good intentions, and hopefully I think I'm one of them. I work for the U.S. Agency for International Development, who's working on things from poverty to global health problems, and water and sanitation. Really trying to make use of data and understand how we can better serve these underprivileged populations and the world at large. And so this research and using data is not a new concept, but I think we're at a pivotal point where the government, like these companies, Target and Amazon, are using this data to make really evidence-based decision making. And so this analysis through the data is able to influence policies and decisions that we use and act on today. So as I said, I work for USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, and I'm currently working in their Office of HIV and AIDS as a data and visual analyst. And so, I think as a child, that would not have been a title I aspired to be. But I grew up and I had a father who is a baseball fanatic, and so I grew up appreciating all things statistics and data related. And I feel very lucky because I get to go to a job that I work with data every single day and get to play in statistics programs like Stata and R and ArcGIS. And so I feel while I'm working in the Office of HIV and AIDS that I'm one of the few who doesn't have I don't have a degree in public health, but because of Batten, I have this diverse set of skills and this quantitative background that allows me to contribute to this field that I wasn't exposed to before. So as a data analyst, my role in the Office of HIV and AIDS is actually to sit in an interagency space working for the Global AIDS Coordinator at the State Department. And so the idea of this office is to bring together the different agencies working on the AIDS epidemic. So USAID, State Department, CDC, Peace Corps, and Department of Defense. To work on this AIDS epidemic under PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which started under Bush in 2004. And so, as I mentioned a little earlier, that this is a pivotal time that the government, and especially this PEPFAR program, is collecting a lot more data and using that data to make decisions on. And so it's really kind of an exciting time to be one of those key players in working with all of that data. So in order to have evidence-based decision-making as a standard, you need to have data in the first place. And so PEPFAR is collecting over 50 different indicators on the AIDS epidemic and its programming, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's really covering all facets of the epidemic, and it's going down to a very granular level that it hasn't been able to do in the past. And so we're able to collect all this data that wasn't done in the past. 5 years ago, all of the PEPFAR data on AIDS and HIV was collected in a single spreadsheet. And today we have a massive, massive database that's collecting all of these things. So all those 50 indicators and all of the disaggregates from that, so looking at age and sex and point of service for delivery, and looking at these things not just at a national level, so at the country level, but being able to drill down to look at what's going on in each region and each district and even at the facility levels. So, with all this data in hand and that's being collected, the demand for people with these analytical skills and this background, this multidisciplinary background that Batten provides is in demand, and it's really skyrocketed. And so that's how I was pulled into working for this office as a data analyst with no health backgrounds. Prior to being in the Global Health Bureau, where I am now, I worked in the Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment, where I was working for the chief economist on cost-benefit analysis and strategic planning, and had started up a data visualization and analysis group to support those efforts, and really trying to bring data into the forefront of what the Bureau was doing. And so all of that work caused my name to be thrown around, and they had a strong need to have data, somebody with a data and qualitative and quantitative background to be able to work in this interagency space. So here I am now working in the Office of Global Health with all of these doctors and people with their MPHs, and I have a public policy degree, which I think is a nice change for some of them. So on my day-to-day, I get to, I sit in front of a computer and I stare at data and I work with these numbers, really trying to visualize and try to analyze what's going on and communicate that story to the government and to governments that we're working in, really try to target this epidemic and really make a difference and take it to that next level of curbing where we're at with the epidemic. And so this analysis is really driven on, like I mentioned, trying to narrow in on what's going on with key populations in particular regions. So being able to not just say, Ghana is experiencing this rapid rise in HIV positive rates, last year, but we're able to say in this quarter of this past quarter, we're seeing 4 times as many female sex workers come in with positive tests. And so really being able to act quickly on this information that's coming in all the time and having people who have this background who can do this analysis is key. And so underlying this effort is really trying to figure out what's going on in real time, which isn't immediately apparent just by qualitative understanding of what's going on or informed decisions. And we need this information to set up better targeting to reach these goals that the UN has set out in order to curb the AIDS epidemic by 2030. And these are really ambitious targets in order to curb the epidemic. And these things need to happen by 2020 in order to rein the disease into control so we can get close to eliminating it. So this puts the government, both the U.S. government and countries working with, under a time crunch and resource crunch to figure out how to reach these goals. And this is where data comes in, and really being able to better monitor the situation through this real-time data collection and understand which populations in particular it's affecting. We can better prioritize, target, and optimize our resources, both time and money, to targeting the epidemic. So as the reliance on this data grows, it's really important to recognize that there are really big limitations to a lot of the data we collect, and that's available to us. In the spring, I wrote a blog post that got picked up by USAID's Impact blog and then the State Department's DipNote blog. That was really calling for the attention for this lack of data that we rely on in the developing world and how we need to improve on reporting, which, I think it's something that it will come. We are as we experience this data revolution, we're only getting better. So, all of that was while I was working in economic growth and working with sparse and unreliable data. And now that I've transitioned working in AIDS and HIV, there's a plethora of data that's available out there, but a lot of it is, there are a lot of errors, just due to over-reporting, trying to reach targets, or partners making up numbers because they don't actually know quite what's going on in the field. So, facing the AIDS and HIV epidemic, extreme poverty, or any other global issue out there, we get lost in the magnitude of the numbers we work with on the day-to-day. So right now, there are 35 million people worldwide living with AIDS and HIV. And I think working with a number that large causes the data in that number to become desensitized and depersonalized. And when you aggregate something up to that level, it's stripped of all the context of what's going on. So the magnitude of this number, just causes us to repeat it. And we say, 35 million, and we throw it out without thinking about what's truly going on behind it. And when we talk about it and the magnitude of it, we kind of lose how large it is. I can't personally visualize how large 35 million people is. That are being affected by this disease. And another problem, too, is when we're throwing out this number constantly, regardless of what number it is, we have a false sense of security around that number, that this 35 million is a true statement, it's a fact, and that's, it's not changing. And we lose sight of the fact that this is an estimate that we're working with, and we have a wide degree of confidence of whether or not, how close we are to actually being right about this. And this is a problem because without that context of what's going on and having a clear sense of the individual cases, we have a limited sense of how to approach the problem. And so it ends up leading oftentimes to being single-minded and only seeing a particular approach to problem solving. So I think in order to solve any global problem or local problem of this magnitude is really to get out from behind your desks and explore not just the number, but what's going on for the people that this is affecting. And so, I've been able to do so. I went out to Tanzania last spring, and this was while I was still working in the Education, Environment, and Economic Growth Bureau. And so I traveled around the south of the country for 3 weeks I was interviewing locals, trying to see whether or not a pilot project would work for their village. We were trying to do a study and set up a random control trial there. And so I was able to interact with lots of people each and every day and see how they were living their lives. And so while in the end we didn't end up finding a village that was actually going to work, I think the important experience was gained in that I was able to interact with the people whose lives I'm affecting with the work I'm doing. And so I was able to interact and see what issues were important to them, at least some of them, or see how they lived their lives and understand some of the context there, as well as the desires that they had. And so this really helped me connect to the issue of land tenure that I was working with on the time and understand I had a better sense of the approach because I understood the people I was working with. And so, I'm lucky I'll be able to travel again, probably December or January, going to Malawi for working with the PEPFAR team there to understand the context of what's going on in Malawi through a expenditure analysis there. So I'll have a better sense of what's driving up costs for resources in relation to this AIDS epidemic and how to better target those resources that we have, like drugs and doctors, to better target this disease. So, and this is not, my first exposure to being connected with an issue. And, I think that really started with Batten. While you're doing your degree here, you get to do the applied policy project. And so in doing so, you're working for real-world clients and solving kind of real-world issues for individuals and able to connect with them on their problem. And so for my APP, I worked with the city of Charlottesville on affordable housing here and how to solve that. And that came from experience that I had and kind of an insights while working with Madison House. I volunteered for quite a few years as an undergraduate and then was a head program director for the Housing Improvement Program while in Batten. So, I think data is a really critical tool that's right now in vogue in today's world. And so I think when being wise about the data we're using and understanding the limitations that are in place as well as the context, we can really use this data that's collected and generated from our own research and analysis to help us discover more and better efficient courses of action to take in targeting major issues in the world today. But it's really critical that data is not used in isolation. And this is where the program like Batten really comes into play. Because Batten provided me with these strong analytical skills and this framework for problem-solving collaboration by working through a number of projects while here. The focus on policy memos and briefs and assignments like the 24-hour project, while stressful as they were at the time, really helped me through strong written communication skills, being clear and succinct in the writing, which is a huge asset for working in the world and getting your message across to either the people you're working with or people you're working for. And so also being aware of the biases that are out there that affect us, either our judgments or our thinking or the thinking of others around us is also an important facet in your education here. We spent a lot of time in the psychology classes here to understand that. And finally, I think having a strong economics and statistical background to analyze the data and interpret the data in the first place is really been my greatest asset in the work that I do. And I think it's a critical factor. We spent at least 4 classes in the Batten program working on that. So with this strong set of interdisciplinary skills that have been paired together in Batten, I think I'm well suited for the projects that I've been tasked to work on. And even more importantly, I feel that this degree offers a wide variety of flexibility so that you can pursue whatever passion may be yours. And so, with this skill set in your back pocket, you're able to do what you enjoy regardless of what field that is, and if that passion changes, you're able to change with that. Rather than if I had gone to school and gotten an MPH, I think I would have had a much smaller track that I would have had to focus in, and if I was no longer interested in medicine, I think I have a much harder time finding something to do next. But with Batten, I've switched. I've been in budgeting. I've worked in for the chief economist in doing these analysis, and now in working in AIDS and HIV. These are all very different areas, but they all rely on the same skill set. So, I think regardless of what area you're interested in going into, I think Batten is going to well prepare you for the work that lies in store for you. And, I think being able to continue and pursue that passion is really critical because that's the drive that gets you going and really interested in the work that you're doing every day. So really try to take advantage of those opportunities that you have available to you while you're here at UVA and in Batten. Put in that hard work because in the end, while it's can be a pain right now, you'll reap the rewards of paying attention through those long statistics classes or econ or things. So really try to take advantage of it, and I wish you guys the best of luck as you continue in the program and looking for jobs in the future. And thanks for coming out. It's the middle of the day. So thanks for coming, and I'll take any questions.
If you have any questions, I'll ask that you please use the mic before asking a question.
Thank you so much for coming today and sharing with us. My question is about the pipeline. Maybe this is me not really understanding how the real world works and being an idealistic policy student. But what can you describe the pipeline between your analysis and wherever that whomever receives that? Do they turn it into policy? Where does your work go once it's released from your desk?
Sure. I think that's an excellent question because I think while we're working in academia as students, we do these papers and we write them and they go to our professors and they're graded, and that's as far as they go. And so it's kind of interesting to see how that workflow works in the real world. And, the best economic answer I can give you is it depends. It really depends on the situation. And so a lot of times the work that I'm doing helps influence. So the way the interagency space that I'm working in is set up is there are different work streams. And so there's a pediatric group that's focused on HIV and AIDS or a care and treatment group. And so these are technical works that are across the different agencies, and they have a technical question about where should they focus their resources to really have the most impact on children being infected. And so I then go through different kind of an analytical work plan that they have established and go through the data myself. And then then I provide them with a memo or a brief of what's going on. And then they take that to the next step of trying to, they set up prioritization countries that they want their group to work in, and then they spend more time and more resources. So the U.S. government team from D.C. will go over to Tanzania or Botswana or Malawi to go work in those particular areas to really try to figure out better ways of addressing the problem. And so that's a good case where what my analysis works out and it goes directly towards solving a problem. But I think a lot of times when you do your work, you end up people ask questions and you dig into things that end up not going anywhere. And I think some of that you can help by being vocal and having a strong voice for what you're doing and sharing that not just with the people who are asking and your supervisors, but sharing that more widely so that other people get influenced by what you're doing and say, well, maybe here's the problem with what's going on here, and they can offer insights or draw on your analysis to do, advance whatever they're working on in their particular area. Sure. right? So working at USAID, I have a direct hire position into the government, but the government also hires lots of contractors to work with it. So when I was working in the Economic Growth, Education, and Environment Bureau, I'd say 90% of the people were direct hires from the government, and there are different avenues. A lot of people were through USDA or other government sharing programs. And then there were also contractors that we brought on to work on specific projects. So there was a streamlining project to figure out how the Bureau could function better, but there were also contractors who were embedded in the different offices themselves. And so, they fully were integrated, and, there's no difference between the work they're doing and the direct hire is doing. When I moved over to the Global Health Bureau, working in the Office of HIV and AIDS, the proportions flipped, and there are about 75% of the workforce there is contractors, and a very small number of direct hires. So while I'm at kind of the bottom rung of things in the government, I have to answer to somebody way up here. Because it's a direct hire, you can't actually answer to somebody who's not in the government as a direct hire. But I think it makes no difference whether or not what your hiring mechanism is that you're all kind of serving this kind of greater purpose, trying to stop or significantly reduce this epidemic and improve the lives of the people living elsewhere. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, regardless of what mechanism you go through, to make a difference. And I think the last thing I'll say here, too, is it's extremely difficult at this time to get a government position right off the start. And, trying to navigate something like USA Jobs is a nightmare. And so I think it makes it easier going through a lot of these contracting firms who then, you're directly contracted to work for the government. And you have, not very much interaction with the firm who's actually hired you. And I think that's a really good avenue if you want to be in the government, to get a sense of that, and gives you more flexibility in getting in and where you can be.
Hi, Aaron. Nice to have you back here. Could you talk a little bit more on the side of the visualization of data, just in terms of what you may have learned here or what you had to pick up in skill sets along the way? Because you're trying to present to both policymakers as well as probably the general public at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I started off in Batten, and my skill set was working with Stata, and it was doing the analysis and not really on the visualization side. And so I could, communicate some of those results, but they tended to be, written descriptions of what's going on or basic graphing, which is okay, for getting things across. But when you're really working with implementers or trying really to sell your idea to people higher up in your organization, or really to understand what's going on in the world, it's important to spend a little more time on these visuals. And so what I started out doing when I first joined USAID was working in cost-benefit analysis, and there was a lot. They exclusively used Excel as a tool rather than Stata. And so I kind of had to go back to Excel and relearn how to use it. But I found that there was a lot of capacity in that, not just for the analysis, but for visualization. So I've taken a lot of classes now on data visualization, whether it's specific to a program or just fundamentals. And so it's working to understand the audience that you're talking to and how to communicate that message. So I spend a lot of my time creating visuals in Excel, so really digesting the data and then trying to think of ways to communicate the underlying messages that are coming across in different visuals. So whether it be mapping, so I use a lot of ArcGIS, or if it's just a bar graph or a time chart and or an interactive figure. So being able to make choices in your policy, so whether you think this is going to affect 10% of the population and make those adjustments, and then seeing how those projections end up changing your analysis and where you think it'll go. And so as a person who's working on the data, it's one thing to be able to look at those numbers or those regressions and see what's going on, but you really have to spend a lot of time communicating that to outsiders who don't understand. And so there is quite a bit of, there's a lot to be gained by spending more time working on those visuals in order to communicate that message.
Aaron, I remember when you were a student, you did a very effective job of reaching out to UVA alums. Back then, there weren't as many Batten alums. You were reaching out to a lot of people all around the world who are Virginia alums, and I know a lot of our students have since reached out to you. So I guess I'm seeking your thoughts and/or endorsement of sort of using how the UVA network and Batten network have helped you, and maybe an endorsement for those students sitting in the audience.
Sure. I was lucky enough to be able to work a lot with Jill when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do post-Batten. And no, but she set me up with a lot of Batten alums who were doing different quantitative work, which I wouldn't have had thought to reach out to. There's a huge network, not just of Batten, but UVA alums that I had found some job that seemed the perfect fit for me, and Jill and I were sitting there and found that this UVA alumni who is working in London now had started this organization way back when. And so being able to piece those things together and having Batten or UVA on that resume allows you to connect with a lot more people. I think the Batten community was really willing to take the time to talk to me about not just trying to figure out, if I would be a right fit there and how to get me in to hire me, but taking the time to think about what are those aspirations that I had. And so I had quite a few conversations with people that lasted a couple of hours, and they were kind of dissuading me from actually applying to work where they are, because they didn't think my skill set or what I wanted to do, not that my skill set wasn't right, but what I wanted to do wasn't exactly in line with what their firm or their consulting firm was working on. And so, and then they would set me up with other people in their class who were working in kind of different areas. So I think it was super helpful, and it's nice to have that network that's available to you to reach out and make those connections. Thank you.